Hey everyone, my name is Jamie and I am 37 years old and I am from Miami, Florida. So I was asked to make a short video, and so here I am. I was born in 1978 in Miami to a blue-collar family. Both of my parents, my mother and my father, were police officers. My mom was one of the first female officers for Miami-Dade Police Department, and my dad worked for North Miami Police Department. So needless to say, friends were scared to spend the night at my house. Long story short, I grew up in Miami, and I was a latchkey kid. My parents had long working hours, and I had a little brother, and we would walk, back and forth to school. My parents divorced when I was younger, and my mother remarried, and we lived with her, and she married a police officer. And in 1992, I was 14 years old at the end of the year, and my mom was very involved in my school and sports and helped the cheerleading team and the softball team. And I was in 8th grade in 92, and my brother was 7 years old, and we had been through Hurricane Andrew, which put my mother and stepfather, who was also a police officer, on crazy shifts. And when you're married as police officers, the police department would work with you, and one of the parents would work, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. During the Hurricane Andrew saga, and the other parent would work 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And that's what my mother worked. She was on nights. And at the end of 1992, my mother found herself going through a divorce again. I think it was her 4th at the time. And it was right before Christmas time. And again, we had just gone through Hurricane Andrew, and her hours had been pretty crazy. And so that year we went to Disney World to spend Christmas with our family that is from Pennsylvania. And leading up to that vacation, I noticed my mom was super tired. She was very emotional. During Christmas shopping time, we were at the mall, and she just was kind of losing it. Again, I was 14 years old, but she was yelling at people that cut in line in front of us. I specifically remember an incident when we were in the car and someone cut us off, and she jumped out of the vehicle and confronted this person in the middle of Miami with her 2 kids in the car. And I guess she thought she was bulletproof, and so did I. I was terrified of all 5'4" of her. So she found herself at Christmas with 2 kids, going through her 4th divorce, and visiting family in Disney World. And it was really hard on her. She stayed in the bed a lot at the hotel and argued with her mother. My grandparents were also on the trip. And when we left that trip to come home, school started shortly thereafter, and she was, for all intents and purposes, looking back now, an emotional wreck. And she was 42 years old at the time. So we got back into the swing of things and got back to school, and on the morning of January 8th, 1993, I got ready by myself, and my mom was getting my little brother ready. And I remember walking into the room, and my mom had my little brother by both of his hands, and she was kind of talking to him. And when I stood there in the hallway, I was wearing a jumpsuit that she had passed on to me. And I remember her tilting her head and saying, "You look like me this morning, you look just like me." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever, like, let's go. I've got friends to hang out with. I've got things to do. Like, you're being weird with my brother." And she was recalling like a little things, a ring that she had bought on her honeymoon in Key West. I was wearing. It was made out of gold wire, and it had a pearl that was placed on the wire. And she got us loaded into her Mustang and took us to a very small private school that we were attending and dropped us off and told us that she loved us. And that was the last time I saw her. I would say 3 hours later, I was coming down the stairs at school to go to lunch, and one of the office ladies was marching towards me with my brother by the wrist, and I thought, well, great, what did you do, you know? Here we go. So I remember looking back at my friends being like, I'll see you later. And then I remember walking into the office, and as soon as the door swung open, I was greeted by my father in police uniform, my brother's father in police uniform, and about 10 other police officers in the city we lived in uniform. And I remember the office ladies were crying. And then I remember screaming to the top of my lungs, you know, where's my mother? Where's my mother? And my 7-year-old brother watched all of that. So looking back now, you know, what a tragic thing for him to go through. So we walked into the office, and the police department had several counselors there. And my dad was standing there, and he's kind of a tough guy. He's kind of a badass. He worked for the crime suppression unit. He just beat down doors and kicked in doors with drug busts until he retired, really. And I just remember knowing that she was gone. I knew immediately. And I looked at my dad and I said, did she leave me a note? So I think that the telltale signs were there for me even at 14. But I really couldn't wrap my head around what happened. And so that day, not only did I lose my mother in the place that I was living, but I had been ripped away from my 7-year-old brother as well. And I don't really know how he dealt with that, because he wasn't told how she died. And I think I kind of knew, even though I didn't vocalize it. My dad, when I asked, did she leave me a letter, he handed me a letter out of his police uniform side pocket. So fast forward 20 years, I had heard a lot of different stories. You know, I've heard that she didn't kill herself, that it was somebody else, that it was her husband that was leaving her. And so I took it upon myself to order her autopsy report from where we lived at the time, and I got a lot of questions answered. And I got a lot of peace and solace from knowing what exactly happened that morning. And looking back, there were signs everywhere. The week before she died, she passed out carrying a basket of laundry across the floor. And I called 911, and she came to during that time, and I told her I called 911, and she picked up that phone as a police officer and said, I am fine. I'm a Miami-Dade police officer, and I am declining treatment. And she knew exactly what she was doing. And she had threatened to take her own life, I've come to know now, several times. So much so that her spouse at the time removed her service revolver from the home. And I just don't really know back then if there were any types of help lines, or if depression and those things were as public as they are now, and if there was as many resources as there are now. So not only did suicide affect my mother's coworkers and her children and her family, but it affected it affects me, and it affects my children, and depression is hereditary, and I'm experiencing that with my teenage daughter. So I guess I'm making this video to say know the signs, know the people. If someone talks about it or threatens it, it is valid. That's not something that would normally be stated if it wasn't. I have heard time and time again, oh, if they're threatening it, they're not serious about it. Well, guess what? She did. She threatened it several times, and she executed it perfectly. She wrote a note to the police department and left it on the front door. She sent a pager code out that she was 10-7, and it was too late because she had already made her mind up. And if her threats had been taken seriously, she might still be here today. So be sure to get all the information and knowledge you can about depression and about the signs of depression leading up to it, and do your part to help, because as someone once told me, I'd rather lose a friend in a friendship than lose a friend in life. If they're going to be mad at you for reaching out to them and getting them some help, that's fine. You could have saved their life. So thank you for listening to me, and God bless.